Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our latest episode of Wannabe Wednesdays. This is Korean Barbecue back with Shrew. We're reunited, actually, for the first time in a couple of weeks. Shrew was just struggling with some serious illnesses for the last couple of weeks, and then when he came back last week, I was busy getting dumpstered in the open qualifiers, so I couldn't join you for that show. And talking about the title Wannabe Wednesdays, that was part of the wannabe there. I mean, I've tried to play some Dota, and our team we're okay. We were one of those lower tier North American teams that'll play in minor tournaments and JDL and stuff. But we ran into a decent team in day one of the second qualifier, and they actually ran a Lycan on us, which is one of the heroes that we've seen a lot this patch, but we'll get to that, and that was the end of that run. So back here with Shrew. Good to have you back, Shrew.
It's good to be back, man. Reunited, and it feels so good. Wait, what round of round of 32 or 64 did you get eliminated in? I'm just curious.
It was 33 to 64, so I think we got to buy the first round, and then we won 2 games, and then we lost the one that would have brought us to 16 to 32, I think, or whatever it was that was day 2. So something like that.
That's not that bad. I like the first round is one. You should probably get 1 or 2 wins. That's what I expected. If you made a deep run, I would have been it would have been the focal point of our show. I would have scratched the entire Shanghai Major regional qualifier, whatever, just talking about Jack's performance, but. Well, so that's not the case.
My team, who I've played with a little bit, they were pretty. They've been pretty solid for a while. I think for the TI5 qualifiers, which I did not play in, they made it to top 8 or something like that, and I think they lost to I forgot who it was, but they lost to the team that would eventually win the open qualifier. I think it was not unknown, but Union Gaming, and then they were upper racks on them. And one of our players was actually streaming the game for some reason, so I think that may have contributed to the loss. But yeah, enough babbling on this irrelevant tier team here that I
wannabe crap Dota
put into the dumpster with. So speaking of qualifiers, we have finished the qualifiers for the Shanghai Major coming up at the end of February and beginning of March, and for each region, obviously 2 teams made it out, and some of these fields were pretty stacked, and a lot of teams that, this is the nature of Dota, I guess, when you have relatively small sample size, but there were some surprises in some of the regions.
Yeah, that's for sure. Especially, since there would be, one team that qualified first, because the nature of, there'd be, 2 groups per region, and whoever wins, the finals, in terms of, the winner's bracket, would go straight through, and then whoever is left in the loser's bracket would kind of duke it out for the second spot. I think most of the kind of the surprises and unexpected teams that showed up happened in the loser's bracket, because just sort of who kind of could bounce back the best way or whatnot.
Yeah. So let's just go through the regions one by one, right? I kind of do like the format for this. It's pretty much that TI format where you have the opens, which none of these teams really want to go through, because again, one game, anything can happen, and there are some strong teams there in the open. So just of note for the NA region, some of my buddies on Veggie Esports Club made it to, I think, the semifinals for day 2. So that was really cool watching the band of casters plus Moneve, a solid mid there, just make their run in that tournament. That was nice. I think the second qualifier, because of workday conflicts, was a little bit less loaded than the first one, but they still did really well for themselves. But ultimately, coming out of that, the NA region would be Complexity and Archon. And I think Complexity everyone kind of expected. I think everyone considers them to be one of the top NA teams, if not the best NA teams. And they also, I believe, a couple weeks ago, punched their ticket to the MDL, the Mars Dota League finals, coming up in a couple weeks as well. And since they've reformed recently, a couple weeks ago, picking up some of their old players and then a couple new ones, they've been pretty strong, and they've showed themselves to. This was not a surprise at all.
Yeah, the team had strong performances going back to when they had Moon and Fly, right, playing for them, until they kind of reshuffled, and those 2 guys went to OG. But we're definitely heading into the tournament as favorites for sure. But they didn't. Looking back, I actually was a bit. I've remembered things a little bit incorrectly. I thought they took the first spot, but actually Complexity did end up taking the first spot of the region, right? That would actually end up going to Team Archon. So
Yeah, so that was probably one of the. Well, I mean, it really depends, right? Like people have very strong opinions either way, but Archon is a team that I think, like there's a lot of these kind of crossbreeding type of things. Like Complexity, obviously, at some point was the sponsor for Fluff, and way back for that team that was Fire, Complexity, and became Liquid. So Archon, of course, captained by Fluff with his band of North American players. I think their first major tournament was ESL One New York, and they were kind of unceremoniously dispatched from that tournament by CDEC. But this is a team that again has some of North America's better players, more established players, and some new blood. They had 747 for a while, and then now they're just down to Moo from kind of like the high level pub scene, and then. They were quiet. Like nobody really heard from them for a little bit since that tournament, I believe. And then there was that big commotion when, because of that 747 drop, they had to go through the open qualifiers again. And we talk about kind of the buzzsaw and the gauntlet that might be. They ended up losing, I believe, to Team Unknown, who ended up going out of that qualifier and making it all the way to Frankfurt. So that was kind of, they were kind of the butt of a few jokes for a little bit because of that drop in the player losing their spot in the main qualifiers. But this is a team that, with the leadership, I think, Fluff obviously has been on the TI stage, and there aren't too many North American players and captains who can say that, who have like still stuck around and are still on good teams. So he has that, and he's got some experienced players, and they managed to, as you said, win the qualifiers.
yeah, I think they kind of came out of like the woodwork, sort of like Team Archon wasn't even really a team. I think most kind of casual to like general Dota 2 fans would be able to recognize or even list many players on their roster. But you take players like Moo, who has kind of established himself over the last year. Jo, that's definitely a name that's been playing some high level Dota for a long time now at international level competition. You have Whitebeard, who's been playing since last year, teaming up with like Demon and yeah, I think on what was it, the champions of like Summer's rep team, and then you have Monkeys Forever, who's also a pretty, I think a lot of people have said like good things about him. Like I think a lot of the established NA players have been like, yeah, I've been impressed with Monkeys Forever, and there's been pretty good talk about his play, and so it sort of just came together at the right time. I feel for Team Archon. Like I think Fluff was talking about how the team was facing a lot of like adverse, like kind of, just kind of typical North American inner, tension or kind of drama, and they were able to kind of put things together and come through and perform.
Yeah, so they had a tough road. They ended up beating Complexity 2-1 in the upper bracket semis, which was probably considered an upset, and then they beat Digital Chaos 2-1 as well to punch their ticket. And if you look at some of the drafts, we're going to get into this more, but this 6.86 patch has been very interesting. And Nahaz pointed out that you have probably the most disjointed type of meta that we've seen in terms of like the regions having their own distinct styles and picks that he's seen in a long time. And part of that is probably just new patch, but it's nice to have different regions kind of branch out. Like I think that's something that everyone wants to see, and it's something that makes the major or large tournament more interesting because everyone's going to kind of bring their own style to the show, so to speak.
Yeah, you kind of do have some, advantages and kind of drawbacks from having such a significant like tournament, being Shanghai being a major, occurs so soon after like a significant patch as well. Like the balance of power patch was really quite recent, and we haven't had that many like big tournaments that can establish like a popular meta for people to study. And so it's kind of cool to have all four regions just kind of show their hand all at one go, because all these teams are, they have everything on the line. They want to show up for Shanghai and maybe get a, show enough at the Shanghai Major to, validate their invite to the international this year. But yeah, and look, there was a lot of different trends that Nahaz kind of touched on. I watched that video on his YouTube channel as well, and yeah, I just can't wait to actually get into it. But we should keep going on talking about the rest of the region performances.
Yeah, so they had that, of course, that epic game against Complexity in Game 1 that won 131 minutes, and the map started opening up. There was like a giant blazing trail of fire and a light from the heavens shining down on the Dark Seer, which is
yeah, funny. I saw that. Yeah.
There were a couple long Medusa games in this tournament. As I recall, DC had a really, really long, or someone had a really long game on Medusa as well. So that hero is one of the heroes that with some changes we've seen this patch that makes her a little bit stronger late game has certainly come to the patch. For Archon, we also have to talk about, I mean, they use Timbersaw numerous times. They use that Enchantress, which has become suddenly a terror in the off lane. They use Lone Druid, a hero who we've seen kind of just, he got drastically, well, not like kind of drastically overhauled, and we talked about this in the patch, and then they put them back into captain's mode. So these new heroes have had an impact definitely on these drafts and on teams. Digital Chaos, who they played up against, have also run a bunch of these heroes, although they didn't qualify, so we'll get to that in a second. So yeah, you're starting to see in North America, like some of these, what are some of the heroes that you've noticed more commonly in North America in terms of their usage in 6.86?
With North America, I definitely just saw, I saw a lot of DP. That was one thing that stood out immediately because, in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, reading over this change log for this major patch, I was like, okay, this DP hero was significantly redone and kind of just buffed her in terms of integrating her passive, like the witchcraft passive, into her active spells. And just kind of adding on her laning strengths with that siphon, like her E now or something. It's like an HP and is it a mana drain as well? I think it might just be HP. I can't recall. But yeah, no, I saw a lot of DP for sure. I saw a lot of Yawar DP when he was playing for Digital Chaos. And yeah, I saw a lot of offlane Ench like you mentioned. I think Moo was playing it like just all over the place. And I mean, we can get a little bit more into like the specifics of the item builds and stuff. But in general, I just saw a lot of strong push oriented kind of strategies. Like you'd see a lot of Chen plus Lycan, you see a lot of Chen plus Lycan plus Invoker, or whatever kind of like combination of those three. And those all synergize well in terms of kind of mid game power pushes as well with the Lone Druid that you mentioned. And so depending on which team you saw, you kind of could have a different glimpse in terms of what they kind of preferred to play in terms of the patch. You saw a lot of mid-game pushes, but you also saw teams push it late as well, like with the Medusa picks that you said, and also obviously setting the record for game length duration. And you can take a team like Digital Chaos as well, and they play like a very kind of laid-back, farming-oriented passive style, like in terms of all 5 players. They kind of prefer to play that kind of tempo. And they kind of interpreted the patch much like similarly to the previous patches, and they're kind of molded their play style as opposed to kind of adopting a fresh or like completely new alternate approach. So yeah, that was mostly like the main things I saw from the North American region.
That's an interesting point there. There's a lot of so I kind of predicted, although proven partially wrong, that there'd be a lot of death balling and kind of gathering in this patch. And I mean, sometimes that results, if that works, it can result in a game being decided very quickly. Like, for example, the Digital Chaos against Archon Game 2, where they had, like, the Terror Blade and Chen and such with Beastmaster. But a lot of times you see now teams sitting behind a kind of tanky-ish core, like, say, like a Lone Druid, or in some cases that Timbersaw, or maybe with the Medusa or something like that, and then it's... if you manage to fight them successfully or hold them off, or even like Lycan, then even after you lose like a lane or two of Raxes, you're able to extend the game out, and then the team that loses some of that gas from their pushing just has a harder time fighting, and that can lead to kind of stalls and longer games. But yeah, you're seeing a lot of the jungle being utilized. Like the jungle was basically maybe not directly nerfed, but relegated to oblivion in the past few patches, and like very few people played jungle heroes. We talk about like, Fluff definitely used to play Chen as one of his, I would say, signature heroes, so that's certainly back in play for him. And then, these teams just helping to leverage that jungle and just getting basically bodies to help them take objectives early on. And that's something I think we kind of expect to see, maybe not in the same way as it's manifested itself, but that's something that these teams have tried to take advantage of in their own various ways. And Lone Druid is one of those heroes that we've seen a lot, I think the most in the NA qualifiers out of any qualifier region, and that's a hero that accomplishes that pretty well, and it's become harder than ever to kill the bear, and you kind of just sit behind him and just let him take objectives.
Yeah, that's for sure. It felt like when I was like tuning into the like Twitch streams, because it was difficult to sort of just like sit and just watch game after game after game, because there was just so much action, right? Like going out throughout the day, you're either watching the North American region or the the European region, and maybe catching a glimpse of China before you go to bed or something, right? But it just felt like games were either like teams were either applying very like timing sensitive strategies, like you mentioned, like you have to kind of get your push timing and kind of get your racks and try to get like a single set of racks by a certain timing window before like late game cores come online, like say like Medusa, or even if like say like a relatively potent late game core like Juggernaut was able to put together the items to fend off the push.
Oh, that's as you said, that's kind of what we saw out of NA. But unfortunately, so among the favorites, the other team that ended up basically was one of the favorites but didn't make it was probably Digital Chaos. We saw them at the Summit 4. They lost to EG, but they put together a pretty solid performance. I would say they gave EG more of a fight in that tournament than maybe anybody expected. Of course, with their recent roster change, bringing in Theban 1437 as their kind of captain and like the steadying force of the team, that definitely helped them. They look like a much stronger team with that addition, but I think most people expected them to qualify for the Shanghai Major. But once again, this major qualifier ending in disappointment for Digital Chaos, as they will not be going to Shanghai, and that's really unfortunate because I'd wanted to see this team. I was pretty excited about this team, and I'd wanted to see them kind of take their talents to that higher stage.
Yeah, they were like a team that always had a lot of potential and like a lot of room in the ceiling of how good they could be, right? Because you have obviously the brother of Sumail and Yawar playing mid, and like there's a lot of expectations as to how good the older brother is going to perform, right? And then in the past they had Biryu, but yeah, after that series, like I mean, since that series against EG at Summit 4, which was I watched that series like completely, and it was like extremely close actually. I think it was like 2-1 or whatnot for EG. Like they actually haven't been able to put together strong LAN performances because we had the Summit 4 where they got eliminated quite early on from the winners bracket, and then I think VP quickly dismantled them, and then they flew all the way over to China for WCA 2015, which was one of the hardest tournaments probably to fly over to as like a kind of relatively untested team, like inexperienced in terms of like the team chemistry because of all the adverse land conditions there and having to adjust to a different time zone. And they had kind of disappointing performance there, placing like well towards the lower bracket of the teams, right? And then with this kind of performance at the Open Qualifier, I mean, I don't think it's like panic mode yet, but it's kind of 3 strikes already, and we don't know like if that's enough to maybe be a sign for like significant changes in the future.
Yeah, this is the rap that there's always been on NA, which is like teams just so easily disband or shift things around. And you're talking about people on this squad though that have been in the scene for a while. Aoi, obviously, 1437, obviously, Boba. These are players who've been around a number of different teams, but I don't think it's obviously there's no way for me to tell how that internal chemistry works. But these are people who I think are seen as relatively reliable and stable players. Like I don't know to what extent they've been the cause of issues. Obviously, Aoi with the much publicized removal from Evil Geniuses after winning TI. But so I can't speculate on that. But these are all people who've been around the scene, and I think with the exception of Yawar, I think they all have TI appearances. I'm not sure if Yawar does. So this is their expectations have been pretty high for this team. They all joined the team with the exception of 1437 way back in August. Basically, I think after TI, obviously with Aoi spearheading the formation of the team. So I mean since then they've had some up and down performances as you mentioned, and I can't speak to anything else, but I really hope that they manage to put it together and maybe a rebound for this. But they'll have to wait another few months if they want to attend the major, which has been announced in Manila, by the way, so in June. So, that's exciting stuff on the horizon, and I hope these guys stay together and finally find their groove.
It is sort of like their last chance, right? Like Manila is like make or break for DC if they make it that far. Like obviously I'm hoping because I actually have like the Digital Chaos tag on like the Dota 2 subreddit, but like I was able to snatch that up during like ESL Frankfurt or whatever. But like I think ESL New York. I just want them to do a bit better than they have been doing because this has been like the second with their like relatively disappointing LAN performances and now like missing out on this qualifiers, we'll have to wait again to see where we'll see DC play again. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean they had been picking things up. Not to belabor this point, but they had beaten Complexity in Dota Pit 2.0. They seem to be adjusting really well to new patch. You see Aoi on that kind of signature Kunkka now. You saw a lot of Oracle, OD, Terrorblade even in one of their most effective games. You see, I mean, Nature's Prophet, Medusa. They adjust very well to the patch because they have some. I think they have some good minds for like finding ideas and like finding that creativity and developing into useful strategies, but they just weren't able to put it together. And it's tough. I mean, it's volatile in these regions. You don't have that many games. There isn't that much margin for error and for
Yeah, exactly.
not going to Shanghai. So yeah.
No, that's definitely a good point.
All right. So moving on to Europe, probably as many observers have said, the most stacked region in terms of qualifiers. The teams coming out of here were Liquid and Team Spirit. What do you make of this?
I mean, I was kind of caught off guard by the Team Spirit thing. I think almost everyone expected Team Liquid to really just take this. They were probably the favorites, and since like the Frankfurt major, they've been playing almost as good as anybody in the EU scene. Like, I mean, you can make a pretty good case that Liquid has been doing just a great job. But with Team Spirit coming ahead of teams like Team Empire, Vega, and even like the new Navi, semi-new Navi, everyone's kind of trying to figure out where Navi stands, and as well as the new Team Empire squad. I think the Team Spirit team kind of just came out of like left field, and we're like, who is on this team really? Like we kind of see some familiar names and like God Black and Always Want to Fly, but then you have like some Ramses carry player and like Iceberg, and they're just like doing so much work on like Lycan and Invoker constantly, and God Black's doing God Black things on an Abaddon, and you're like, okay, they're just winning constantly. So yeah, no, that was really impressive watching them play because they had like really exciting games. I don't know if you were able to catch any of those highlights.
I did manage to watch some of those games. Again, I'm pretty similar situation to you. I wasn't able to sit and watch all the games, and they were going literally like 24 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was only able to catch bits and pieces. Whoa, I just accidentally cursed it. Bits and pieces. My words are jumbling into each other.
It's all good. It's all good.
So yeah, like I kind of liken Liquid to what we had hoped for DC. Like this was a team that formed relatively recently, right? Like in the shadow
Yeah.
of TI5, and then they also had suffered that same disappointment because they didn't qualify for Frankfurt, just like DC. So it was like, yeah, does this team have the juice? Do they have the players? And I mean, I would say that maybe their players are a little bit less well known than DC's were, at least to North American ears. But they really started to put together. They went to Nanyang. They came in, I think, fourth in that tournament. They won D2CL Season 6. They won the Defense Season 5. And they beat OG 3-1 in that series. They toppled Empire in D2CL. So they put together some really strong performances. They went to WCA, and I think they came in like a third place or something.
Yeah.
So this is a team that, as you mentioned, had really kind of started to establish themselves. And, they were approaching, I would say, probably invite worthiness for directly to the majors, and they kind of just proved that by steamrolling their way through this. So it's nice to see that there's going to be Liquid Squad. It's not the same as when it's maybe we don't have the same level of excitement and love for this team as we did back in the TI Liquids. Those are some memorable squads, but this team has been really strong, and they kind of kept that going through this qualifier.
Yeah, I really like the comparison you made to Digital Chaos. Like, this is a team that's kind of met those expectations, and even though they had a little bit of setback and something that could really disappoint, like such a veteran-laden team, like if you have Fata and Kuroki, missing out on a major, like that's kind of a shock for those two guys. Probably two players I'd expect to just compete at the highest level. And even Matumba, man, he's been playing on relatively decent teams now over the last year or so. And so with Liquid missing out at Frankfurt, like that could be something that could set a team back, like kind of mentally, and be a cause of concern. But they came out and they, like you said, they bounced back against Sochi, and then their performance in this major was like in this qualifier was like very convincing. I felt they did super well in the groups. They led their groups, and then they just steamrolled straight through, picked up the first spot, and it was just like, okay, we're just gonna go ahead and snatch our Shanghai flights right off the get-go, and everyone else can just duke it out. And that's kind of what it felt like. Liquid was like ahead of the pack, and then it was just like Navi, Spirit, and Empire just going like crazy. So
yeah, so Spirit, as you mentioned, maybe not with the biggest names, but there's Scott Black, of course, a veteran and a respected captain in the scene. They had some really exciting games, as you mentioned, just a lot of huge plays coming out, and they had to battle a pretty stacked field. We talked about Liquid
Yeah.
already, but there was the new Team Empire, right, with like a Vost and the new when like I think Funnick and then you have the new Navi, as you mentioned. And then there were some teams, like, for example, Vega, who won ESL New York and had some decent finishes in Game Show Global. They attended the Major and Dream League, and they didn't make it out of that qualifier. So that was really a kind of a minefield and a murderer's row of teams that the European qualifier had, and Spirit outlasted them.
Yeah, I'm looking at like the field of teams like right now, and even like the worst placing team, like this team called Elements Pro Gaming, you have names like Illidan, General, Yogi, Screen, like if that team is gonna place like dead last or like tied fifth to 10th or whatever in the standings, like holy crap, that's a pretty good like field of teams for EU. So yeah, it was definitely like you said a minefield for these guys to kind of navigate out of, and I think almost everyone was like either cheering for Navi or Empire, right? I mean, in terms of just the relative size of fan bases. And man, some of those Spirit Navi games were just like, I think Navi was fighting against like Mega Creeps or whatever. You've got like, I don't know, Dendi going crazy with RPs and just going full, and like Ditcheron as Ember Spirit. Like these were like super exciting games, and they came down to the wire like constantly.
Yeah, and just a week before that, I had the privilege of casting some lower tier European tournaments, like maybe Pro Dota Cup and stuff, and like just thinking about all the names that you recognize out there and these scattered across these various teams, as you mentioned, like Elements Pro plus like Hellraisers and all these other teams and the teams that came in through the Open, like Pycat Squad, Mama's Boys, I believe, and then plus like London Conspiracy, which may be a little bit less known, but Baby Knight is a name that I remember from Dota 1 back in the day. So Europe is just absolutely stacked, and I feel like this is one of those regions where if you played the whole thing again, you might have just a totally different outcome. And there was some controversy, I think, over Alliance being directly invited to Shanghai, even though they won WCA. And I don't know, if you put Alliance into this buzzsaw, I mean, and you run it back a couple times, who knows how many times they make it through. So those direct invites are pretty important because in Europe, especially, it's just a killer field out there.
Yeah, like Dota is such a like matchup dependent game, right? Like it's sort of like styles make the make the game or make the matchup, right? And so if you replace like Team Liquid with say for Alliance, like would Alliance have gone straight to the the first place of like the entire kind of bracket and kind of just like almost like sweep out the field, or would they have maybe struggled against their old nemesis Navi? Maybe they get knocked down a peg, lose a couple of games, and like if this field of teams was like rather than those top 3 or 4, if it was just really just great parity, who knows like who would have come to Shanghai from the EU region. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and then just based on, as we'll delve into this more, based on the patch watch that we've kind of given for Europe, so the two heroes that really stood out were the Ember Spirit, Ebola Spirit was 7-0, I believe, in the qualifiers, 100% according to the information that we gathered courtesy of Nahaz and Gorgon. And then Chen was 12-5 with a 70% win rate. So those are the two heroes that, and Death Prophet as well, 7-2. So two heroes that received major overhauls. Three heroes that received major buffs, improvements, and overhauls, and were brought into this patch, just really making a show of things in Europe.
Yeah, I felt like the Chen pick was just kind of was so flexible. Even though like you do have a relatively predictable timing in terms of when your lineup will probably be strong. Well, basically when Chen is strong, right? When you have those relatively early pushes and you kind of get an early influx of gold with early tower kills. If you ban out the Lycan for like a team who was also boasting a really, really impressive win rate of like 70+%, they might pick up the Druid. If you ban out the Druid, they might pick up the Invoker. If you ban out the Invoker, they pick the Prophet. Like there's so many combinations of like this early mid game push like strats that teams could kind of rely on, and those were kind of like really effective. I felt in terms of these just like mass stream of games that are like BO2 series. You don't really have a great amount of like a great sample size to really just test the team and figure out their style in 3 games. You only have 2 chances, and so Deathball is just such an appealing way to play the game, and Chen fits right in with that. And Ember did kind of stand out in terms of like a remnant of the previous patch, because that hero got a lot of play.
I see what you did there, Remnant. I see.
Well done. And but he kind of also addresses that death ball kind of like growing trend again, because he can obviously depush very effectively. And the more number of summons that you have, whether it's like Forge Spirit or Lycan's Wolves or Necros, that's just more damage for the Ember Spirit. So it does kind of make sense in terms of like the overall data set of like hero picks and whatnot.
So I don't have the numbers for Ember, but here's kind of the concern. So yeah, he does have that like good cleave as you mentioned, and cleave is more important for clearing creeps than ever. But the problem with Ember, even though he's very good at split pushing as well and mobility, is that he kind of needs items to be able to do that. So if you see people still going for like the early travels or investing in stats, it's usually hard for them to get, unless they have a great start, it's hard for them to get that Battle Fury in a good time before, like by the time it really matters for like stopping the death ball. So I think that's something that we're seeing maybe that Ember is starting to struggle with a little bit, depending on the timing of these pushes, because he does need levels up in his Sleight of Fist and items to really effectively clear the creeps. Because the hero's weakness is he's not one of those kind of like consistent frontline right clickers. He's not something that we see like even like a Sven or something where he just pops an ult and just starts cleaving stuff down. He kind of needs to constantly like either have someone else hold the line or have it not matter whether you hold the line, so he can get multiple slights off and use his mobility. So that's something that we're seeing in kind of dealing with Ember, because like if you start shoving sub 15 minutes and like the Ember's got a boots up and doesn't have his battle here, like what is he going to do? He doesn't really deep push that well. He'll probably have like 2 or 3 points in sight by then. Like what is he really going to do to like deep push? He can't stand there and trade hits with anybody. That's his weakness. So yeah, you might start seeing that the timings kind of make him not as important, because you don't have time to wait for him to come online before they get into your base. And it's the same with, we see heroes like Anti-Mage, who maybe some were anticipating to have a big impact in this patch because of the prevalence of nukers and the buffs to nukers. But really, when you pick that hero who basically soaks up space rather than creating some, it feels like a lot of times you're just inviting the other team to run at you, and that hero does not want to be fighting early on. So it's interesting that the cleave is like better, but at the same time, cleave is dangerous as well, depending on how they try to deal with it.
Yeah, especially how like the heroes incorporate in your lineup. Like if you're relying on him to like bring the damage, for example, and you have like a Chen and Lycan army kind of pushing in your safe lane tower or whatnot, like 15, 60 minutes in, maybe the Ember Spirit just had completed his Boots of Travel, which is the like most pervasive kind of greedy build we saw out of the last patch. We didn't see a lot of early like phase drums. We saw mostly like BOTs into Battle Fury into like a Blink, and it's a mainly like kind of split push oriented style of play that was like really popularized by like players like Eternal Envy and even Sumail, like kind of pressuring in an indirect way, like, oh, your lanes are constantly pushed in. That style of Ember and that kind of buildup of Ember is weak, and like it's less appealing to play that manner when you can't really face the enemy team head on. Like, guys, we can't deal with this push right now. I need to farm my next item. I need to get my Battle Fury up. And all of a sudden, you have no tier 1 towers, and you have less jungle, and Ember Spirit is trying to beg his rest of his team to kind of like hold the line, but everyone's getting poor because there's no camps to farm, right? And so yeah, I think it's a good point that you made, that Ember Spirit kind of might fall through the cracks in this patch. But I also do believe that hero is always going to be kind of relevant in terms of like really, really high level play. And I think it kind of reminds me of like a hero like Rubik, because Ember Spirit is just, when you watch like a super talented Ember Spirit player like use the hero, like say for example like maybe like LGD maybe, or Sumail, or even Eternal Envy, like those guys do just ridiculous things, like flame chain, like chaining 2 heroes over here, cleaving over here, and just having like tremendous net worth. Like that hero is just like always darting across the map and creating so much space in terms of within the fight, not just on the map in terms of like pressuring lanes. That like it's kind of like the like analogy of like the old school like Rubik support players. Like the people, like the players are so good on the hero that it doesn't really matter what the meta is, because they're just gonna make the hero work because of what that hero brings to the table. But that's just my thoughts on the hero.
So. Yeah, I agree. That's one of those heroes that you kind of want, generally speaking, you want the fight to go longer because he can get off more slides, and the really good players can maybe make you feel that you have an opening or a chance to kill him, and then you just kind of get the run around and get like he actually is the rare type of carry hero that instead of right clicking does the kiting himself, kind of.
Yeah.
Played well. So yeah, it's really nice to see that in skilled hands and absolutely maximizing the hero. But yeah, like you talk about, sometimes we bring it back to like AM and stuff. When you're playing against heroes like Lycan and Lone Druid that just run at you and take your buildings, it's pretty hard for for that to matter, because they force you to fight where you do. They can localize the fight to a place where you don't want to be taking the fights and where you don't have any advantage in taking them on. And you think about what AM does against like Lycan and Lone Druid and stuff, it's basically nothing. Like if you get rooted without Mantle, you're probably dead. Against Lycan, he just runs at you, and you don't fight that well against these kind of face rush heroes to begin with. You kind of want big targets for your ultimate. So
Yeah.
I don't know why we fixate too much on AM, but to bring things back on topic, so we saw a bit of that going on in Europe. And so let's move on a little bit and kind of recap these last two regions before we return. Is LGD and Newbie qualifying from that region, and I think the notable team that got knocked out, although maybe not all that surprisingly, was Invictus Gaming, Chuan's former flagship team, and Chuan is of course now a member of Newbie. So what do you think about this region?
Yeah, that was definitely a little bit surprising, just looking at like in terms of like the team names. But then after you like you mentioned, you realize that Chuan isn't on IG anymore. You realize that Burning hasn't been on IG for a year, and you forget that Burning's actually on like Vici or whatnot, and you're like, okay, so who's actually on IG again? And then you look down the list, it's like, oh, there's Rabbit, okay, there's Rabbit, I guess. There's Ferrari, okay, he's always good. Then you have Luo. Okay, he's a little shaky sometimes in like the big games, and then you have XDD and Super, who are like relatively, they're not the big Chinese, giant names, and so yeah, IG kind of had this big shift away from Tron. Like Tron leaving the team does leave a big voice, I feel like, in the team, right? Because he is such a huge like personality and kind of like force of like cult of personality or whatnot, and with him moving over to Newbie, I definitely had Newbie relatively high up there, and I just felt like the top teams in this region, like this was quite like when you compare like the EU region with the Chinese region, it was like night and day. I felt like you would have the super experienced like elite teams with like LGD and Newbie, and I guess you could maybe slide IG in there, and then you had just all these like youth squads which were like either like offshoots of these like major organizations, or just kind of these upstarts, young upstarts like Wings Gaming, for example, or even this Team Fantuan that I have no idea about anyone on that team.
So I heard some things from them. I think ZSMJ is on that squad. They had some older.
Yeah.
There's another player as well. I forget who was it. YY? I don't know. There's another like old school player, and I don't think they were taken too seriously even within the Chinese team.
Yeah.
But it was like this. So I don't know if I relayed the story, but I think I told you, but I heard the story about how ZSMJ just stuck with his streaming and stopped taking the game super seriously and wore like random monk robes and stuff on stream. So that team is not very respected within China, and I think they were eliminated. But yeah, it's nice to see these youth squads. I think CDEC had 2 youth squads. They had a young and an Avenger squad or whatever, and then IG Vitality made it all the way to the winners finals before they ultimately fell to the 2 teams that qualified, which would be, as we mentioned, LGD and Newbie. So I think, I think the Chinese region kind of performed according to expectations. I think LGD was a good enough and strong enough team that it would not surprise anybody if they were just directly invited to Shanghai, and they certainly performed that way throughout the tournament. And they showed some adaptation to the new patch as well. And here's one thing I want to point out. So with like the revival and resuscitation of like the CDEC like in-house league, which is their equivalent of FPL, I think you're going to see a lot of these kind of younger players and newer teams, like this new blood, kind of just get injected into the scene. And then we talked about, we mentioned before WCA actually Wings Gaming, who ended up making a splash there, and is going to be, I think, at Starladder. So there's a lot of these like pretty strong teams swirling around that the tier 2 of China that are starting to get some shine and starting to show themselves. Newbie Young we saw as well at the Frankfurt Major with some talent on their squad as well. So I think it's nice that those teams got some reps and got some burn here. But the familiar old names, LGD obviously, and then Chuan kind of trying to bring that, as you mentioned, he's like a flagship player, and he's kind of like a signature player within the Chinese team, and the team probably just goes with him. And you talked about IG, the old squad. I mean, Ferrari has been taking a lot of flack within the Chinese team lately for his play and his consistency. So, I mean, maybe it's the end of a chapter for good for IG, and then you're seeing Newbie try to get back into the thick of things.
Yeah, it is kind of disappointing to see that, because getting into like when I was really started getting to the Dota scene, Ferrari was just maybe like close to like the top of his powers and like the peak of his play, and it is kind of sad to see like him have this kind of revolving glass door of like pros coming in, trying their hand, playing with Ferrari, and then ultimately funneling out to another successful venture that's just not on IG. And if this Tron this Tron departure is another example of that. That'd be really kind of sad to see. If Tron just makes newbie into like a powerhouse team again, like that would really suck to be an IG fan, which I'm sure there are tons of people still, supporting that banner. But yeah, I mean, LGD and newbie coming out of this bracket, I mean, it shouldn't really surprise anyone. Although I guess, the biggest surprise to probably take away from this qualifier region was, IG Vitality just completely outperforming IG, like their older brother team, and like that's probably going to be a sign of some changes within that organization.
Yeah, and we talked about, again, a lot of these branch teams or youth teams, they have a lot of talent. We talked about CDEC's youth team. They have like Inflame and June and some pretty well-known players. And they were able to, I think, take a series or something off CDEC, or at least hold serve with them. And CDEC, I think, did get a direct invite to Shanghai, but I like everybody on that team personally and stuff, and I love the style of the squad. But they also they've kind of been limping along, it feels like, since TI. Like, they've done just enough to keep getting direct invites to these major events, but they haven't, maybe they just got patched out. They haven't played with the same success that they had. Like, it seems like they'll always beat the teams that they're supposed to, but when they run into like an actual quality team, we saw this in Frankfurt with Secret, I believe, or was it EG? I think it was EG actually. Yeah, that dispatched them from the upper bracket. They just, I don't know. They haven't looked like the same kind of dynamo of a team that did, but they came out of nowhere, and we could easily see some of these Chinese teams reprise that role this year.
Yeah, like you made a good point. Like CDC actually, they just really didn't find their groove, even like in the the months leading up to Frankfurt after TI, and like there was quite a long time between TI and Frankfurt. Like, that was a couple months, and CDC was like playing really freaking good at TI. So for them to kind of take a little bit of a step back in terms of staying ahead of like the entire scene, because they did get outplaced at Frankfurt by eHome, right? It's a little bit disappointing, but again, like, it might just be a matter of them kind of finding their groove again. I don't know if they've been patched out. They, like, the style that they played was just so like perfect in the moment. It was really like dynamite, like you described. Like, they just blew up. I like TI. It was just like, who are these guys, right? But hopefully they can kind of like mold their style, I feel, because I feel like CDAC has to play CDC, style Dota. Like, it's just sort of just like, the comparison I made previously with like DC playing the DC style. They just kind of have to adapt that and kind of like rebuild their understanding like within this new kind of the new change log, and kind of see what they can kind of new heroes they can pick up that would suit their like players' play styles. So
yeah, so they've been saying that, like, we're learning the patch or whatever, and now there's a brand new patch for them to learn. They were saying that all through 6.85, even through the major and in interviews and stuff. So again, another new patch is thrown at them. Again, I don't know if they've had that same magic, or maybe they've been figured out a bit, or maybe their aggression isn't necessarily suitable in the same way, where maybe now it's more objective based aggression rather than trying to lock your opponent off the map and fight that same way. So it's hard to see, but we'll see them in the major, and LGD and newbie. I mean, some pretty name brand teams coming out of the Chinese region up against some new blood that will hopefully find a way to shine. So moving on to Southeast Asia, I think again for most fans of this region, there were three teams that they'd heard of really from Southeast Asia, although TNC and Execration have been out there for a while. And the three teams were probably FD, First Departure was Miracle Squad, and then Fnatic, which recently lost Black and had to replace him, and then finally MVP Phoenix. So it ended up being Fnatic and MVP Phoenix that stepped out from SEA.
Yeah, I'll be honest, all these games happened when I was like literally asleep, so I was able to catch too much of it. But this doesn't really come too much as a surprise again, because I mean, Fnatic has just been like heads and shoulders above the rest of this scene for like what it feels like it's just been months now, right? Almost like half a year or whatnot. And MVP Phoenix kind of bouncing out. I mean, I'm not coming out ahead of the rest of the field is also not too much of a surprise, because those guys always have they're always up to their own shenanigans and their kind of like niche picks and their own quickie style. I mean, they're the only Korean team in this entire field, if I'm not wrong, right? So this it's good to see those two guys come out again. But yeah, I mean, when we talk about like the North American scene's instability, it's pretty easy to draw comparisons as well to the SEA region, because I feel like in terms of like that area of like, it's kind of hard for us as like Western Dota fans to get too much of a good grasp of what small tournaments we can catch execration play this week or signature trust, right? We kind of have to stay up at a little bit weird hours or like catch replays. And I feel like I hear more about like match fixing scandals or whatnot than I actually hear about good gameplay or whatnot. I don't know if you have anything interesting to share about it, Jack.
Yeah, I mean, you hear about stuff like that, and it's like,
Really sad.
the perception that most people have, I think, of Southeast Asia Dota there is kind of like, you got these people barely coming over from Dota 1, still playing in their, like, super grimy, like, internet cafes, and like
CRT monitor.
a lot of unscrupulous stuff happening over there. And then you start to see how you start to feel that it's a relatively weak field because it's always the same teams, and then you wonder, like, Mineski, for example, is getting invites to these kind of premier tournaments, and they kind of don't look like they're really playing like out of their league. They're playing opponents that seem to be pretty far outclassing them. But at the same time, though, I've heard in the past, and I don't know if you can speak to this with your joint Dota background, but that SEA is one of, like, the real hotbeds and, like, real growing regions for the game. So it's nice for
It's
them
super
to
popular.
have like
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it's so with the announcement in Manila, that's nice that they're getting their own
Yeah.
major. It's kind of like people were saying it's probably going to come down to CIS or Southeast Asia. It ends up being Southeast Asia. So they have a growing scene. They have a lot of support and love for the game, and they have hopefully some up and coming teams from that can step in, and the ones that are finally transitioning over from Dota 1 to Dota 2 can make a splash as well. So it's nice that they have a very vibrant scene there, and I think maybe the exciting thing that I noticed from this qualifier is that I think Mushi is back on carry now, so he's moved back to the one. So that's nice to see.
That is sick. That is sick. I mean, I love watching him play Shaman, but like I can't deal with it much longer. Like I need to see him play mid or at least lane against someone, right? So it's good to see him play back on core.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's so, and then MVP Phoenix. I mean, I think they've established themselves as probably one of the strongest, if not the most consistent and strongest Korean team. So it's
Yeah.
good to see them. And it was pretty funny when the Koreans got into Dota. There was all this hoopla a couple years ago about are they going to take it over like League of Legends and such, and how long?
Overlords, right? Yeah.
Right. So the timetable that was given when that happened, because I think that was around like TI3 or TI4 time, was TI6. So Korea, you have 7 months to take over the scene, and get on it, man. It's the time's up. Your anointed time is here.
Yeah, it's interesting to compare like the SCA region as well as to Korea because even though we have like a team like MVP Penis, my God, did I just MVP
Your
Phoenix?
slip up was worse than that.
Probably.
The
Like they're
pressure-
okay. Let's get okay. Their plays probably it out like represents like outperforms their region, sort of like how big the region and like how big the scene is in Korea, right? Because they're playing relatively high level Dota, but as far as I know, like the whispers coming out from the east is like Korea Dota is kind of dying. It's not very popular. It's kind of getting shadowed by like League of Legends or whatnot. But then you have like the SCE teams who are kind of really struggling like in the middle of the pack and kind of just being led by Fnatic. But like you mentioned, it is a really really big scene. You have all these kind of huge fan events from time to time, like Team Secret. If you recall, like they flew over there just for some big meet and greet in Malaysia at one point, and so like there's definitely a huge like need, and like these fans are hungry to watch some good Dota and for their teams to get better, and it's just gonna take time, like all the young kids like watching their idol Mushi like perform on the big screen. They're probably vying for their own chance, and maybe this Manila major is just gonna be just what this scene needs to take another step forward.
Yeah, so as we mentioned there, it was Fnatic and MVP Phoenix that will be going and representing them. And first departure, Miracle will not be able to make it onto. There's 2 Miracles to watch now of equal renown, but only one of them will be at the Shanghai Major, unfortunately.
Yeah, it sucks. I like Miracle a lot. I like his Naga. But I think Miracle is probably the better player. But yeah.
Yeah, so it seems Mineski didn't even make it out of the group stage, and they will not be heading to this major. So now that we have the the majors kind of wrapped up a little bit. So what were some of the larger trends that we've noticed so far in 6.86 and on the patch? I mean, we had some sample size in the weeks before, but obviously this is the most important one because, as you mentioned, this tournament, this qualifier has the most at stake.
Yeah, I think we touched on a bunch of these things already, just in terms of describing some kind of like signature picks for each team. But a lot of these signature picks from each team were very representative of the regions as well. There's a few things I want to get through before we close the show. And like overall, I think since the end of like the last patch, a lot of analysts and casters really saw a growing trend in terms of Invoker's strength and like Quas Wex Invokers specifically in terms of like he just was performing well in games, and so they're like, maybe Invoker is going to be a rising pick because he definitely seems to be a strong laner, and he has a unique impact on the game, especially against certain heroes that are very like weak to stuff like silences, like Ember Spirit or whatnot. But regardless, Invoker has been the biggest. I feel like the biggest like jump ahead in terms of heroes since these qualifiers have begun across all regions. It's been the highest pick and ban percentage over heroes such as Gyro and Venge and Darkseer. For raw data's sake, Invoker has been picked or banned 187 times over all regions, right? And Gyro was 161 times and Venge was 121 times. So Invoker leads the pack like with a significant margin. And he has been relatively, it's been since he's been picked and banned so frequently, and so he's been picked very frequently as well. He's kind of been his data has been spread across like the good teams, the mediocre teams, and the relatively weaker teams, right? And so it's not too surprising that he has like a 50% win rate. It is kind of I feel like with like these pick statistics, you have to take it with a grain of salt because an Invoker played by whatever Execration's mid lane player is, whoever he is not going to be the same thing as Miracle playing Invoker, right, at like the Shanghai finals for all we know, or for example Resolution's Invoker that we also know is very potent. So it does matter a lot about who's on the actual hero, and that's why you should always take these stats with a grain of salt. So that was like the main thing I saw in terms of overall. And obviously it does kind of make sense with what we were describing in terms of the way this patch has been played. Like Quas Exort Invoker commonly builds up Necro 3 relatively early, right? Midas straight into like Necro 3 or even Necro 3 Rush. And when you have like two sets of Necro 3s with like a Lycan on your team, or a Necro 3 with a Lone Druid Bear that's Alacrity'd, right? Like blowing up your buildings. Like obviously you can see how this could probably make sense in a game. Moving on to like actual regional things that I picked up on. I did want to touch on China because they have been they've been doing like the usual China thing, which is kind of being slow to adapt and kind of sticking to their guns, kind of playing relatively safe. But they did kind of really quickly pick up on Zeus. I don't know if you've kind of seen a lot of Zeus in your pubs, Jack, because I haven't played too many pubs. Have you been seeing a lot of Zeus? I don't know. On your
I haven't been playing a lot of pubs in general, but yeah, I have noticed that Zeus is in addition to the Arcana, he looks different now, but he is back in the professional meta as well.
Yeah, I saw like a lot of. I think I heard a lot of the casters like identify Zeus as a rising like pick in China, and it was definitely reflected in the stats that I looked over. Like he was like top 4 in pick rate, and of the top 4, he had one of the most impressive win rates at like 65%, which is super good. And when a hero has such a significant win rate and is picked so frequently, like that, then like as like I said previously stated, this hero is getting picked by the good teams, the mediocre teams, the bad teams, and he's still performing, like he's still winning games. I think the biggest thing I picked up on watching or looking through all like the item builds and even like who is actually picking this hero was that he's like a really interesting flex pick in China. Like he's being played off lane almost as many times as he's being played mid, which is his traditional role, and he's even being played support, which is like really surprising. And Nahaz identified it in his YouTube video, which was like his qualifier reactions video, and he said that the Aether lens was like a big like part of the formula in terms of allowing his like main nukes to actually match the cast distance of his static field like range. Like it's very, very close basically as opposed to before where like the distance was much farther. But that doesn't really explain like the mid and off lane like prominence, because most of the builds in those that I looked over, which was like a couple, like maybe 6 or 7 games, um, they kind of skipped over that build. Like they were sticking to like the traditional like mana boots into like Yules, eggs, and Octarine over even Aether Lens. So it was kind of interesting to see. It's like so even like the supports like definitely would want to go for the Aether Lens because it allows you to stay quite far back in the fight and just kind of like peep. You kind of like a sniper, like just cast all your spells like a screen away, and you're just like and frustrate the hell out of the enemy team, and while doing quite a lot of damage. But like the mid and off lane style of Zeus play is just like blinking in and just like getting the most out of all your nukes and being relatively tanky with items like eggs or bloodstone or octarine. So yeah, I mean that was probably one of the biggest things I wanted to share with everyone.
So we talked about kind of how sometimes things can cause a tipping point or cause a hero to come back in, even though they don't look like the biggest of changes. I mean, as far as I recall, like Zeus didn't get any huge buffs, and Invoker got a buff with that invoking at level 1, but like nothing that was like seismically overwhelming. But this is again what you touched on with like the meta and stuff is a really good point. And you talk about Invoker being a natural book carrier. He's one of those heroes. So I mean, just personally, he's not a hero like Doom, who you hate in pubs and you hate to watch in pro games because he's kind of a potatoy hero. Invoker is fun to watch. Like when you see good players play Invoker, it's nice. Like they can do a lot of things with the hero, but he does help out in these kind of like set piece frontal battles. He's really good and he can be mobile and gank as well. And as you mentioned, he has that book which naturally contributes to the push. Zeus may be becoming more popular for almost an opposite reason. Like not only does he have a lot of lane presence and the arcane rune helps and such, but as you mentioned, lane versatility, offlane Zeus is something that we've seen in pubs for a while, like a couple patches ago, where it's like not where he can usually farm and push back the waves to ensure that they get pushed back at some point by the tower, and he can kind of farm, and it's hard to kill him, and it's like even if you kill him a few times, right? Like as long as he gets a few levels, like he still has a similar effectiveness if he's not being played as that core. And
No, that's
also,
100% correct. Yeah,
when you talk about these like kind of set piece battles, right? If you have like if you're pushing into a Zeus or something, and you're fighting in this choke where you were like you have to go through a certain area, like Zeus excels. Zeus is pretty good in those kinds of situations, like where he doesn't want to be flanked, he doesn't want to be kind of just run at or surprised, but if he just has to hold like a patch of ground, he can piss out a lot of damage pretty consistently with or without Aether Lens. And if you talk about survivability being an issue on that hero, I mean Aether Lens adding that much range to his nukes, like it becomes very hard to close the distance on him without totally committing into a fight. So if you start to see these kind of clumped battles and you see like the boosts to casters, even though maybe Zeus isn't, although he's decent at clearing out like a gaggle of jungle creeps as well if you're trying to push, like this hero just has a lot of defensive and offensive utility for the current meta, and the indirect buffs have helped him too. So I think that's contributed to his rising popularity.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think actually one of the things you touched on, I want to expand a bit on before we move on from this, because like Zeus is commonly regarded as just like like what does he strike you as? Well, he's just a nuker, right? But he's actually probably one of the most talented counter pushers in the game, because like you said, you're when you're forcing through a choke, right? Forcing down a tier 1 tower, maybe committing multiple heroes. Zeus makes it just so problematic because he gets so many times. His spells are such low cooldown, right? He's constantly outputting damage, nuking your wave, nuking your creeps. But the biggest thing I think that is kind of looked over on this hero is that he's able to pull the creeps away at a very safe distance, the actual lane creeps, that is. And he's able to clear them almost like a screen away from the actual tower because of how long his Q is. He actually aggroes them so far away from the tower that like you basically have to force your Chen creeps onto it, maybe your Lycan Wolves, and your heroes can't. It just becomes very problematic to actually push through. Like he can't maybe solo fend off a push. He does probably need some assistance, but he just makes it so much like more difficult, delays it the time, and the issue of like making it like like an efficient trade in terms of like farm and economy. Like the team with the Zeus that's counter pushing this death ball is coming out ahead because elsewhere on the map they're able to find safe farm and really push out waves. And yeah, it's a big thing. And I kind of compare this new Aether Lens Zeus to kind of like a Molotov cocktail in a sense. It's like cheap, dirty, and kind of just really surprisingly effective. But if you have the farm on Zeus, and if you want to play the traditional way, stack up all the luxury items like a blink dagger, a Yules, eggs or whatnot, like you're gonna do a boatload of damage. And that was also the big thing that I wanted to share as well, is that support offlane or mid, this hero is going to probably lead your team in hero damage. It's just how the hero works. Like if you did, the stat, if you looked it up on Dota, I would not be surprised if Zeus just leads all heroes in total hero damage, just because he just pumps it out constantly, like you said. It's just as a matter as to how the team is going to apply it, which makes it a very dynamic pick, I think, and something to look out for.
Yeah, and there are multiple heroes that do this. Like I play Venomancer a lot, so I find that's another hero that is frequently leading the team in damage. But the nature of that damage does matter quite a bit. And so, as you mentioned with Zeus, I mean, if this is a hero that with farm becomes quite
Something
a bit
else,
more
yeah.
and is very bursty compared to a hero like Venomancer. For instance, who has some of the same functions that Zeus performed and maybe performs them better with less farm, I would argue. But Zeus, if you're playing him in some kind of core position where you're expecting something out of him, he becomes a pretty decent priority in these fights relatively quickly, or he will just, if you let him get off multiple rounds of, for the most part, teams do not win fights against this hero if he's just managed to just keep blasting away multiple times. The fight is going to turn at that point. You're going to have too many low heroes. So yeah, it's interesting to see. I mean, this isn't a hero that I would say I enjoy watching as much as, say, an Invoker or a Puck, but he is actually he's somewhere on the potato spectrum in terms of what he does. I mean, obviously, there's skill, a lot of skill with him, in terms of vision and all that stuff, and you can read an old Merlini Zeus guy, and it's still really good in telling you the intricacies of playing the hero. But yeah, it's I mean, yeah, it's nice to see that he went from kind of irrelevant and disappearing to, is emerging back in the game a little bit.
Yeah, direct buff to Fata. I mean, probably the most well-known Zeus player I can think of, outside of Merlini, of course. Props to his Dota 1 All-Star highlight reels. So,
even though that tri-lane in grainy footage that you could barely see was done 10 years ago, he's still Zeus. You just got to give him that.
I mean, Merlini just showed up, right? I mean, on Vegetable, he was crushing people. I think a ton of pros. I think I saw Envy tweet. He was like, "Yo, shit, Merlini's legit," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm really happy to see that." So,
yeah, I mean, this just I don't want to say too much. I mean, this is someone who brought a lot to the scene and one of the original minds behind the game. So it's nice to see that he still got it and he's able to play with actually a decent team and they're able to kind of make a dent out there. So. So we talked about this before, just a minor aside, but I said this was the only time that I'd pick veggies over steak, and I don't know what happened to steak, so I think we got that one right.
Yeah, it's not fair though. I mean, you have Merlini. It's I mean, who's even on steak? I can't even think about it.
I think they actually have more actual professionals or active players. Than Veggie did, as far as well, then again, we could just say Veggie did themselves a solid by going to NA, which they crap on even in their casting, and Steak had to go make their way through the gauntlet that is Europe. So maybe that's the out if you're a Steak fan.
Right, you got Capitalist and Milk living in Germany and playing on NA servers. Okay, guys, yeah, I don't know if that's stat banking, but it's something. So.
All right, so I think that's going to just about do it. Is there anything else you want to add for today's show, Shrew?
No, I think we covered the gauntlet of the qualifiers. I mean, I do want to add, I mean, looking ahead next week, there's going to be games tonight, as the show is being recorded on a Tuesday for you Wednesday listeners. There's going to be some Star Ladder games coming up. By the time you guys are listening to this, I think the replays will be up from the night before. Star Ladder, I don't know which one it is. Jack, do you know which number it is? Star Ladder 96, 97? Which one?
I stopped keeping track long ago, but I actually think this one doesn't have a number. I
don't know Roman numerals anyways, man. It's
I think it's the Star Ladder I-League series. So it sounds like there was some kind of merging with a Chinese entity or something, or I-League. I have to get on that. I should know this, but
China taking over. Anyways,
yeah. So Imba TV is their partner, and that's the I-League, the team that ran I-League. So that's about to start up. $300,000 prize pool. In terms of teams, a loaded field. We have EG, Secret, and Liquid. Yep. We have Navi, who is directly invited, so they will be playing on this one. Yay. Alliance qualified for this tournament. So Navi and Alliance, Vega, Virtus Pro, and Spirit, and also through the qualifiers. So a lot of strong teams here from the Western scene, and then from China we have LGD and Wings. And Wings, we mentioned, qualified through the Chinese qualifier in LGD. So actually, the bigger Chinese names are not in this tournament. No Vici, no eHome, or anything like that, or Newbie. But and finally, from the Americas, we have Complexity, and from Southeast Asia, we have Fnatic. So a nice mixture of teams here. Another chance to see Evil Geniuses play, which is always a pleasure, and finding out how that team manages to mix and integrate their talent. And so, yeah, a pretty top-heavy juggernaut type of event here, and I'll be looking forward to watching those games tonight, and we'll have more data on the patch, and we'll see basically how these more established teams have interpreted the patch. We haven't really seen like AG and Secret and such, right? So we'll get to see them.
Yeah, we'll have definitely a lot of stuff to talk about and compare to next week. So yeah, I think Starlight will probably be finished by then. So we'll bring you guys the recap and our own thoughts on the differences in terms of like how these pros try to interpret this patch. So till then, yeah, signing out, I guess.
All right, thanks for joining us. And as usual, some plugs. Defenseofthepatients.com is our website. That's defense with an S because we are Americans and not British. And you can find Defense of the Patients on iTunes. And, of course, you can click through the Amazon banner on the website to support us and all the growing DOTP network of shows. And as usual, tomorrow it'll be Theorycraft Thursdays with Ursinity and Proud. And if you'd like to give us a follow on social media, you can find .p_show, DOTP_show. That's the show one. My partner Woodshrew is at Woodshrew Dota, and I am at KBBQ Dota. Thank you for listening in to this latest episode of Wannabe Wednesdays, and we'd love to have you again next week.